right, so the northern kingdom of Israel. We're kind of coming back to the northern kingdom of Israel here, and it has been going downhill since its inception. Since it became a nation, the northern kingdom of Israel has been going down. Its first king, this is a repeat question, I've asked this many times, the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel was? The first king of the northern, the divided kingdom now. We're not talking about Saul or David or Solomon. What's that? Jeroboam. And you might remember that he set up the golden calves at these two cities. You get one? Dan and Bethel, the northernmost city really, and the northernmost city is basically up by Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus asked Peter, "Who do men say that I am?" Dan is right next to that city. And the southernmost city there is Bethel, Beit El in Hebrew, the house of God. And they basically wanted to stop the people from coming down to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. And so this is not good. When you're setting up these golden calves and saying, "These are your gods, O Israel," it's the same sin that happened really at the base of Mount Sinai when Moses went up and he came down. And Aaron is like, Aaron, as the scriptures say, that he fashioned the golden calf. And of course, that's not what Aaron said. What did Aaron say? "I put this gold in, and out came this calf." The people made me do it, Moses. But then the north, things are going, they started out in a bad spot and they only went downhill. Turmoil and instability have ruled the day. There was one guy who ruled for a week. Zimri ruled for a week. And right after Zimri, you have the rule of the house of Omri. And the house of Omri's most famous, most notorious king, the most notorious king in the house of Omri in the north. Anyone remember his name? Ahab. I've heard Ahab's name to a lot of questions. Ahab's the guy. And his wife, Jezebel, two of the worst people that have ever existed in all of human history. And they wreaked havoc, in biblical history at least, they wreaked havoc on worshipers of the Lord. And lately, the instability has only increased. Now, we're kind of dealing with Israel on the left side here, and I started in 841, but we're kind of working our way down this list, and you just back up one king from Hoshea there to Pekah, the son of Remaliah, who ruled for 20 years. Of course, you're seeing some really short rules in there, the rule of Zechariah, the rule of Shallum. You're seeing some political, what we're suspecting here is political rivalry, where there are sometimes two kings claiming the throne in addition to another, during another king's claim of a throne. And Pekah, the son of Remaliah, rules for 20 years, but again, two other kings are claiming that throne during his rule at some level. And we're just trying to figure that out a little bit. We don't have all the answers there. Maybe one day we will have those answers. When we get to heaven, we will. But what we have seen already is that Hoshea, or what we were going to see here at least a little more, Hoshea, he conspires against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and he murders him. We saw that back in chapter 15 and verse 13. We'll see a little more about that tonight. But this guy's an idolater as well. And so things are bad. All these kings, these are bad guys. And when you're away from the Lord, and when you basically spit in the face of the Lord, and you shake your fist at God, and you defy him, judgment is coming. Judgment's coming on the house of Israel. And Hoshea here, he ends up being the last king of Israel, and he seizes his throne, like so many others, like so many kings of Israel before him, through murder, by murdering Pekah, the son of Remaliah. Let's jump in here to 2 Kings 17:1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I can't reconcile the timeline here, and I'm not alone. So I'm just going to tell you, we don't have the answers to figure out how to reconcile the timeline here. What we know is that God is always right. We know that, and man doesn't always have all the answers. So when I'm trying to reconcile these rules of Hosea is the hardest one for me to reconcile of all of them. I don't really have a good answer. I don't think we really have a great answer to reconciling the timeline of Hosea's rule against Ahaz's rule. But again, we know that God is always right. And man doesn't always have all the timing and the dates right. We're doing the best we can given the information that we have and trying to give you the years on these things. But anyway, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, became king over Israel and Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. So he rules from what we're estimating that he rules from 732 to 722. That's what we're saying. Again, we may not be right on that, but we're saying 730 because there's a 10-year discrepancy in our timeline here somewhere. But we're saying 732 to 722, understanding that God's word is true. Man's attempts to reconcile it are sometimes mistaken. Our timeline may not be perfect here. But anyway, Hoshea is evil. Look at verse 2. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, only not as the kings of Israel who were before him. So he's not as evil as the rest of the kings, but he's still evil. Yeah, and you compare him to other guys, like, I'm not as bad as this guy. But doesn't change the fact that he's still what he is. And God's patience with Israel finally runs out. Look at verse 3. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against him, and Hoshea became his servant and paid him tribute. So right around 727, these are the numbers when we're trying to reconcile history with the Bible. Right around 727, Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria. Now, you remember from last week, Syria, they're off the map. You remember that from last time? Syria's off the map because the Assyrians came in and conquered Syria. And so what we're dealing with right now is the northern kingdom of Israel. And you remember last week we had this little, this is the little mice, and you have the big cat. Remember that? Assyria is the big cat, and these nations are just little mice. Israel is now a little mouse, and the big, huge cat of Assyria is encroaching upon its land. Well, right around 727 is when Shalmaneser becomes king in Assyria, and that's kind of right in the middle of Hoshea's rule in Israel. And he comes against Israel. Assyria's already taken Syria down. He comes against Israel, but Hoshea at the time is able to pay him off, and he pays large tribute money. It's like a tax in order to keep his kingdom. Basically what happens is he becomes a vassal king, and what that means when you're a vassal king, so Trump is the president. He is no vassal. Like, he is no servant to some other king somewhere. That's how pretty much every independent nation feels. Some of those guys are a little closer to vassal kings than they think. That is, they still have independent rule, but man, if they don't listen to, say, Trump, they're going to pay a heavy, heavy toll. And that's kind of like, all this conversation about tariffs that have been coming out, and, Trump threatening tariffs upon Mexico and Canada. These guys cave right away because they know our economy is going to be destroyed if we don't do what he says. It's not quite the same because Trump's not saying, I'm going to come in there and I'm going to conquer your place, although he wants to make Canada the 51st state. I think that's a bad move politically speaking because of all the liberals that are in Canada. But it's a good economic move, a terrible political move. But if he said we're gonna seize your land, or else you pay, or we're gonna seize your land, it's not quite that. It's similar though. It's like you're gonna pay, or you're gonna meet these demands that we have. So it's something similar to that. Well, Hoshea is like, he's got to pay this money out. He's going to pay this money out to Shalmaneser, a large tax. And he continues to rule, but he basically he places himself under Assyria. He's like, I'm your servant. I get to keep my kingdom here, but I'm your servant. But eventually what happens is he turns against Assyria. So the king of Israel is like, no, I'm done. I'm done paying this money. I'm not going to pay this anymore. And so he actually turns to Egypt for help. And he turns to So, or Osorkon IV. He turns to So, the king of Egypt, for help. And he wants Egypt to join together with him and fight against these Assyrians. Now, does this sound familiar in the north? Do you remember in the north, Israel wanted an ally against Assyria? Do you remember who they wanted to gather together with to fight against the Assyrians? Does anyone remember? Israel and this nation. You already said it. The Syrians, the Arameans. So they want to gather together and fight against the Assyrians. And they wanted another nation to join their coalition. Does anyone remember who the other nation was that they wanted to join their coalition to fight against the Assyrians? Maybe on this side? They wanted Judah. Judah didn't do it. And that was a problem. Syria fell. Well, now that Syria's gone, they know they're not getting Judah's help. So they go to Egypt to try to get help. And when the king of Assyria finds out that Israel's not paying his tax anymore, he's not giving me my money, show me the money. When he's not showing him the money, and when he's going and finding other guys to try to fight against Assyria, what do you think? You think Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, is going to be happy? Be like, okay, I'm not going to take my money. It's all good. Let's just, be done with it. You go get your allies and fight against me. That's not gonna fly. He's not happy. And so look what happens here in verses 4 through 6. The king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea. Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, finds conspiracy. Like, this guy's rebelling. Hoshea, who said he was going to be the servant king, is not remaining the servant king. The king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, who had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt. That's Osorkon IV, for anybody who cares about history. Hoshea sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and had offered no tribute to the king of Assyria. That's what I just told you guys about, as he had done year by year. So the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded the whole land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and carried Israel away into exile to Assyria and settled them in Halah and Habor on the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. And so what happens is the king of Assyria comes down and he captures city after city. He comes down and invades Israel. And right around the year 724, he captures the king of Israel. He captures Hoshea, and he puts him in prison. And he holds him in prison while he surrounds the city of Samaria. So now we're talking about siege warfare again. For those 2 years, from 724 to 722, Israel technically is kind of like left without a king. Their king is in prison. And now the Assyrian armies, they've surrounded your capital city. Nobody can get in or out. And you remember we talked about the siege. We talked about siege warfare. Now, that's not something that really happens so much today. Today we do something a little bit like that. But we do it when it comes to trade. Have you ever heard of trade, like trade embargoes or trade, let's say we disagree with things that are happening with the Iranians. Are the Iranians, are these good friends? Is Iran a good friend of America or of the West in general or of necessarily peace or of the Jews? These are not great, the Iranians are not, the Iranian government is not a great government that's friendly to our nation. Don't tell that to Obama, because he had no clue. He was giving these people money. He was helping them build nuclear power plants to use it for energy, because let's give these, Muslim terrorists nuclear capabilities and imagine for a second that they're not going to misuse that to build weapons. Like, you have to be one of the dumbest people alive to give these people nuclear energy, okay? But that's what they did. They helped. Obama didn't, but what we're looking at doing is basically cutting off money and cutting off, during Trump's first presidency, Iran was going broke. They were going broke, not because the United States surrounded Iran, but because we stopped trading with them. And we basically kind of, they weren't able to sell their wares, their goods. They weren't able to sell their oil so easily, and they started running out. Their economy started being decimated. Well, it's something like that, but that times like 100. So you go back to, in this case, the 8th century BC, the 700, 722 BC, 724 BC, and the army comes in and they surround your city, and you can't get anything in and out. There's no food to bring into the city. Water begins to run out, and the people are starving to death. The people are dying, and women are eating their dead children. And people are eating their own dung and drinking their own urine as they wither down to nothing. Have you ever been on, and I hate to bring up a terrible reminder of anything like this, but have you ever been on someone's deathbed who basically withered down to nothing? They could no longer eat. The amount of food that they were given just really didn't sustain them. They keep them the size they were, and their body just kind of, right? Anyone ever see that before? Imagine that en masse. Imagine that throughout the whole city, where the entire city is running out of food and they're being starved to death. They're being starved to death. And the Assyrians are outside waiting it all out. These guys are going to starve to death. And when they starve to death, when the last bit of food or the last dead child has been eaten, then we should be able to easily knock over the ramparts, knock over the walls of the city and take the city, and all these people will be dead, and we won't even have to fight. That's siege warfare. And that was a popular warfare in the ancient world. Well, by the year 722, Samaria falls. It was the last city of the north that had held out hope that maybe Israel could maintain its something like independence. But Assyria comes in, is able to capture the city of Samaria, place its own gods in the city gates of Samaria, tells the people of Samaria that Israel's gods traveled up to Assyria and capitulated. Basically said that Israel's gods came up to Assyria and said, "You win." That's what they tell the people. Your gods have told us that they've given up. And now we have the support of your gods. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anything that we read about in the near future in 2 Kings? Can you remember an Assyrian king who went to a king of Judah and said, "The Lord has told me to come here"? And does anyone remember who the Assyrian king was? Who said that? It's not many years hence from where we are. Not the same king, Sennacherib. And does anyone remember the king of Judah, who had to listen to this garbage? Hezekiah. So this is not the first time they've done this stuff. This is what they do. This is their MO. Well, anyway, they come in, they take the people of the city, they deport them. What basically happens is they'll take the people of this region and they'll send them throughout the kingdom to various places, and send them to places like Turkey and Medo-Persia, way off in the east over here, and places like Nineveh, and which is right in here. And they'll take the people of those areas and send them back into here, into Samaria. And the reason why they do that, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Why would they displace all these people? They take all the people, let's say we're going to take all the people from the United States and we're going to scatter them into places like China and Japan and, Togo, Africa, and different places like this. And then we're going to take all those people and we're going to put them in America. Why would they do something like that? I know it's a completely different thing, but why would they do something like that? Less likely for uprisings. Why? The people are scattered, first off. But now the sense of national pride changes because these Jews who are up there, these Israelites, you have a conglomeration of peoples put together here with no sense of national unification. Rebelling in that type of a scenario, it's considerably less likely to have these people come together and rebel. Not only that, but now you're sending these people in, and even the worship of the various so-called gods changes. When you send these people into Israel, and now they're coming in, all these foreigners are coming in, well, they may worship the Lord as a local God, but they're going to continue to worship their own gods. And so the whole situation is designed to maintain and hold power, to secure power. And that's what the Assyrians do. And this is exactly what God said would happen. Check this out. God said it way back during the times of Moses and Joshua. Deuteronomy 28:64. Moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which you or your fathers have not known. This is what's going to happen if you don't follow the Lord. Even in the days of Joshua, Joshua 23:16, when you transgress, it's not if, because we know these people, these are stiff-necked and rebellious people, eventually they're going to transgress the covenant of the Lord. When you transgress the covenant of the Lord, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, when you make false idols in Dan and Bethel, and when you make golden calves and tell the people, these are your gods, O Israel, and when you accept the worship of Baal and Asherah and all these things we're going to see here in a minute, when this happens, and when you go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and you will perish quickly from off the good land which he has given you. God said it way back in the earliest days of Israel's time as a nation. He said it during the time of Hosea, the prophet Hosea, Hosea 13:16. Samaria will be held guilty, for she has rebelled against her God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed in pieces, and their pregnant women will be ripped open. God warned them. This is what's going to happen. If you rebel against God, this is what's going to happen. These evil people are going to come in there. They're going to destroy you. And you're going to let it happen when you worship other gods. And God sent prophet after prophet to them, but they refused to listen. They refused to repent. And now, after 200 years, Israel is no more. Samaria has fallen. And the reason why they fell is idolatry. We have a statement of cause, a statement of we have a reason here. God tells us a reason why this happened because. Now this came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. They rebelled against God. They worshiped false gods. They rebelled against God's commands. And actually, we could see this. Go back to Deuteronomy 18. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There's been so much idolatry in so many different ways. They adopted syncretistic worship in high places, and what I mean by that is that's like mixing religions together. Syncretism, religious syncretism. That's when you're taking the worship of some false god and you're implementing it, you're integrating it into the worship of the Lord. By the way, the Roman Catholic Church is the most syncretistic Christian sect that exists. I mean, they took all these idolatrous worship festivals and all these even the timing of the celebration of Christmas was part of Constantine's attempt to take some festival that was some pagan festival and make it into a Christian festival. So I mean, in its purest form and its original form, the Roman Catholic Church is a syncretistic paganized version of Christianity, if you can even call it Christianity, because it's not Christianity, it's not biblical Christianity at all. But here, these guys adopted syncretistic worship in the high places. That is, they mixed the worship of the Lord with the worship of false gods. The sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against the Lord their God. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified cities. They worshipped Asherah and other gods. They set for themselves sacred pillars and Asherim on every high hill. And Asherah was a female fertility goddess, and she was part of the sex cult between Baal and Asherah and all this stuff. They worshipped Asherim they set up Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. These are poles, images of the female fertility goddess of the Canaanites. And there they burned incense on all the high places as the nations, just like the nations did, which the Lord had carried away to exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking the Lord. They served idols, concerning which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." I mean, the sex cult is terrible, 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 debaucherous. You're using religion to carry out debauchery. And they continued in rebellion in spite of the warnings from God. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers and which I sent to you through my servants the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers who did not believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant which he made with their fathers, and his warnings with which he warned them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them. And so God continued to warn them over and over and over, and yet they continued to rebel against him. We're seeing the reason why this happens. We're seeing the reason why Israel falls as a nation. They rebelled against God. And by the way, there are a lot of people who do the same thing today. They rebel against the Lord in spite of hearing what God says. Most of the people in this nation, we have a general understanding of who the Lord is. It's something of a Christianized-ish nation. There's Christian background. People know about Christianity, which is interesting. I was at the Y this week talking to a guy about things of the Lord, and he's asking questions, and he's like, which was the guy that replaced Jesus? Was that Lazarus, the guy who? And I'm like, Lazarus? No, Lazarus is the guy Jesus raised from the dead. Are you talking about Matthias replacing Judas? And he's like, no, the guy who replaced Jesus. And I'm like, wait, are you talking about the guy the people chose over Jesus? Are you talking about Barabbas? And he's like, yeah, that's the guy, Barabbas. And I'm like, yeah, Barabbas. They gave the people, choose Jesus or Barabbas. He's like, yeah, that's the. And this woman over here says, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and I don't know anything you're talking about. She didn't know a thing. She didn't understand any of it. But our people, they have something of a in general of a Christian type of an understanding, and yet they continue to rebel against him and against his truth. They hear God's truth. They even hear God's gospel. They hear God's call for them to repent, and they reject it. And something like that is what happened with the people of Israel. Israel committed idolatry at Dan and at Bethel with Baal and with Asherah in verse 16. They forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves molten, graven images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heavens and served Baal. They worshipped Jeroboam's false gods. That's something we already saw in the passage. They worshipped Asherah, something we already saw in the passage. They worshipped all the host of heaven, the stars and the planets. They worshipped and served Baal. Even worse, they worshipped and served Molech and Chemosh, the gods of fire, these fire gods of Ammon and Moab on the other side of the river. Then they made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire. What they would do is they would take, we talked about this already, they would take their children and place them in the hands of an idol, and then they would burn those children as burnt offerings and murder their children as a burnt offering to that god. I'm going to give my child to you, and light their kid on fire and kill their kid. They made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire and practiced divination and enchantments and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. And this is in spite of what God made clear. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire. One who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. You will lose the land if you do this stuff. And that's written. Anyone want to give me an approximate date on when Deuteronomy is written? You're going to lose your land if you do this stuff. Anyone want to give me a rough idea on the date? We're going to say, he says 1400 or so. We're going to say 1406. That's what we're going to say. We're going to say that the Exodus happens in 1446. And 40 years later, right before they enter the Promised Land, it's 1406. And what year is it now in our passage? 722. Someone do the math on that. What's 1400? Let's make it easy. Let's round. Let's just do 1400 minus 700. How many years is that? Kids, how many years? 1400 minus 700. I gave you a question. Anyone want to? I'm going to come back to you in a second. 1400 minus 700. Anyone else want to? Go ahead, buddy. 700. We're talking about 700 years before it happened. God said, you're going to lose your land if you do this stuff. And then 700 years later, what do you know? They do all this stuff and they lose their land. No wonder God brought judgment upon them. They sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord. No wonder God took them out of the land. His grace towards the northern kingdom of Israel eventually runs out, and his judgment comes against them. And so, look at this. The Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. None was left except the tribe of Judah. And to make matters worse, Israel wasn't just bad with themselves. They spread their evil to Judah. Look at verses 19 through 21. And we're going to move through some of this a little quicker here. Also, Judah did not keep the commandments of the Lord. The southern kingdom did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs which Israel had introduced. They started doing the same stuff Israel did. The Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. Then Jeroboam drove Israel away from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. We're seeing all this evil that took place, such that even the kings of Judah are walking, we saw this back in chapter 16, in the way of the kings of Israel. And Ahaz, king of Judah, made his own son pass through the fire, even in the south. Evil people spread their evil ways. And that happened here. I can't help but think about the status of America and the transgender movement today and all this stuff. And they're even trying to claim that it's science. It's so ridiculous, so absolutely ridiculous. And the homosexual movement, the LGBTQIA+, all the other letters that they're going to claim, they won't stop with you just tolerating their view. They're not okay with that. You have to, they won't stop until you believe what they believe. Evil people love spreading their evil. If you don't agree with them, you're a terrible person. You're a bigot. You're a racist. You're, my personal favorite one, homophobic, because I have fear of homosexuals. I mean, it's just the language that's used is so ridiculous. I've got arachnophobia. Anyone here have a little arachnophobia? You see a spider, it's like, depending on the spider, maybe we all have a little bit of arachnophobia there. I'm homophobic. I'm afraid of homosexuals because, I preach what God says. It's just so crazy. The language is so leading. They'll call you all types of names because they want to spread their evil thinking and their evil ways. That's all the work of Satan. It's exactly what Satan wants. Satan is having a field day in Western culture, but long before the current mess that's going on, he was having a field day in Israel. And Israel was taken into exile as judgment from God. The sons of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They did not depart from them, the golden calves in Dan and Bethel, until the Lord removed Israel from his sight, as he spoke through his servants, the prophets. So Israel was carried away in exile from their own land to Assyria until this day. There are consequences for sin. There are consequences for evil. Many people die in Israel, and the nation of Israel is removed from its land, and the people are taken as slaves of foreign people and foreign gods. Next week, we'll take a closer look at what that looks like. What does it look like to be in exile? What does it look like for the people of Israel to have been taken out of their land and taken to Assyria? But for now, let's consider the timeless principle that we see in this passage, which is really only a portion of a passage. And the timeless principle that I see is that if you turn away from the Lord and you ignore his word and you reject his word, there is judgment. Judgment's coming. Israel turned away from the Lord. They did not worship him his way. They worshiped all kinds of false gods and idols, and they faced judgment because of it. They lost their independence. They lost their home. They lost their freedom. In many cases, they lost their lives, and this was judgment for rejecting the Lord. That was temporal judgment. That was the judgment of this life. But there are eternal consequences to sin as well. And these idolatrous Israelites would one day stand before God in eternity. And it's appointed unto man once to die, and after this, the judgment. These idolaters, they would be cast into hell, where their master, Satan, will one day be with them. And that timeless principle is still true today. Because Western culture, listen, the fact is we're living in Western culture which has rejected the Lord. And it will one day face his judgment. And people you know and love, even if they're moral, but they've rejected the gospel, they will face the judgment of God. People who reject the Lord will face the consequences, sometimes in this life, but certainly in eternity. They will face the judgment of the Lord, and they'll stand before God and answer. You don't want to stand before God at the great white throne judgment and be judged based on your works. Because everyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire, which burns forever and ever. Hell. But praise the Lord, he provided a way to forego his judgment because he loves us with an everlasting love, and he sent his son to die on the cross in our place. If you place your faith in him and you accept God's truth and you trust in the work of Christ on the cross, and that alone, nothing else. It's not Jesus plus works. Because listen, what did the Israelites really need? They needed the Messianic king. They needed the Messiah. They needed the Lord. It's not, I'm trusting in what Jesus did on the cross, and I need to get baptized, and I need to become a member, and I need to take the Eucharist or the Holy Communion, and hopefully one day I get to purgatory and burn for hundreds of thousands of years until I pay the penalty for my sins. And one day then I might get to heaven. It's not that. It's I'm trusting in what Christ did and what Christ did alone. Because if I could be declared righteous by the works of the law, then Christ died for nothing. If you place your faith in Christ and Him alone, salvation is by grace through faith alone, you'll have everlasting life. And you'll spend eternity with God and with His Son. And instead of facing God's judgment, you'll face His grace. You'll receive His grace. And so if I had to sum up the point of something like this, given everything we know in the Scriptures, I would say something like this. You need to worship the Lord alone and place your faith in His Son alone in order to receive everlasting life, or else you'll face His wrath and judgment. Let's take our hymnals and turn to 391. If you're not sure you're saved, then you be sure to come and see me.